For those of you that don't know me, my name is Mark Leckington. I'm proud to be the Vice President of Affordable Housing Professionals of New Jersey. Normally, we would have Ed Schmier on the call with us, welcoming everyone. He's off today, and he has nice weather in DC. And he's asked me to not only welcome you all and serve as the serve his role, but also I have the privilege of being the moderator today on this call with you all. Before we jump into the program, though, I wanted to address the elephant in the room. I have a feeling at least some of you are already in the Q&A asking about content from AHPNJ on the new Fair Housing Act. And I'm sure everybody knows that Governor Murphy just recently signed probably the most sweeping piece of legislation we've seen in New Jersey's affordable housing history. And there's a lot of changes that have come with those regulations, and including it laying the groundwork for some changes to the uniform housing affordability controls. And we've seen a bunch of different organizations roll out some summaries and PowerPoint presentations, and they've been fantastic. We're very thankful for folks like the American Planning Association of New Jersey, the New Jersey League of Municipalities, and others. And we are working, the HPNJ is working on a series of sessions on this, on the changes to the legislation, as well as looking at them through the perspective of the administrative agent and the municipal housing liaison. In fact, we should be receiving a save the date email for the very first session in the series for May 8th. So keep an eye out for that. But let's get back to the program. The AHPNJ programming committee, who's headed up by Brian Rappaport, could be with us today due to some conflict at the last minute. They worked up this presentation today to focus on strategies and challenges, smaller projects in our affordable housing portfolios. Our panelists today include Leslie Stavali, she's the CEO of Triple C Housing. We've got Terry Adelstein as a project manager from the Coastal Habitat for Humanity. Chris Puglisi, he's the director of housing development at the Affordable Housing Alliance. And we are hopeful that we are going to also have Brian Dempsey from the Borough of Spring Lake to talk about a project there. But he has had some technical issues in joining, but we'll keep an eye out for him. Just a little bit of a sort of a primer for the conversation today. I think it's very tempting for all of us in this affordable housing world to think that smaller projects are more predictable and bring less challenges than the large scale affordable housing projects. And I think that kind of amplifies a lot right now, especially in this current era of the large scale changes and things that are going on with the low-income housing tax credit program. I don't mean necessarily changes to the program itself, although there is a new QAP out this year. But I mean the challenges that the economy has forced onto large scale developments. So you may have a developer in your community that got a 9% reservation for their funding and a 9% reservation of tax credits for their project, and then they found through increases in prices and interest rates that the project no longer pencils. It's requiring a lot of developers to completely recast the funding and to redesign the projects, at least from a financial perspective. Today we're going to talk about the smaller projects, though, and I think what you're going to see is that they're also wrestling with some similar problems and pressures on their projects, but they're also have their own kind of unique problems to bring their project online. And challenges, we'll call them, not necessarily problems, but things that make it just a little bit more difficult. And I also think that the same issues that large scale developers are dealing with can be even more impactful on small projects, because these small projects that we're going to talk about today don't have the benefit of absorbing increases in costs and interest rates and personnel issues. They don't have the benefit of being able to absorb that across the larger project. And as we know, some of these larger projects also include market rate units that have the benefit of bringing additional dollars into these projects and sort of additional ways in which to kind of absorb some of these issues. Our session today is going to be largely conversational. We'll ask each panelist to tell us a little bit about their overall efforts to create affordable housing, and then we'll throw out some topics for discussion. If you'd like to join the conversation, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the window. We'll try to get as many questions and topics as we can. And I also want to mention throughout the presentation today that you'll see a few pop-ups that will basically be there to take your pulse and make sure you're still participating with us. And the purpose of those pop-ups is for anyone that's seeking continuing education credits for your participation today. So if that's you, keep an eye out. We'll also try to verbally announce them in case you have the window, if you're joining us in a sort of an audio only mode today. With that, let's get started. I want to start with Leslie Stavali from Triple C Housing to sort of give us a little primer as to the types of projects that they're working on, and introduce yourself to the group here.
Good morning, and thank you for having me this morning. I appreciate being a part of this conversation. Just to tell you a little bit about Triple C Housing, we have been in operation, this is our 45th year, and we really started to launch our affordable housing development initiative starting with the OHA grant way back in the day. For those of you who may recall, Office of Housing Advocacy had tapped into some of the balanced housing funds and afforded us the opportunity to actually not only be a grantee, but to have a steady pipeline of production as a result of that grant that has, no pun intended, afforded us the opportunity to really ramp up our development activities. And with that, we also set aside a very healthy development reserve. And I mention this in particular because through the development of our pre-development and development reserve, it has given us the opportunity to actually do a acquisition prior to receipt of funding on the National Housing Trust Fund. And I'm just going to jump into that quickly with you all. So in the context of smaller projects, we are typically looking at our portfolio being developments that focus on special needs housing. And as a result, we tend to develop much smaller projects, no more than 10 units at a time. And with the introduction of the National Housing Trust Funds, it comes with the capital, the subsidy, and the ability to budget in service dollars. So it's a fantastic way for an organization such as Triple C Housing to develop smaller scale projects that can be a duplex and two side-by-side units that can support a range of population needs. And in particular, we do the special needs housing, and we've supported, particularly during the pandemic, families with a head of household survivor of DV. And with that, we've developed 1-bedroom units as well as up to 4-bedroom units through the Affordable Housing Trust Funds. But to break it down in terms of how we do this, so our pre-development efforts focus on making connections with municipalities who obviously also are motivated to fulfill their fair share and their co-obligation. And we ensure that we have municipal support because as we're going into a project, we want to make sure that we're also looking at the project feasibility and incorporating a pilot into that feasibility analysis. So we're going into the territory with a feasibility analysis, incorporating municipal support, and also looking at the negotiation for a payment in lieu of taxes. With that feasibility analysis, we are looking to make sure that we're meeting all of the criteria embedded in the National Housing Trust Fund guidelines. And once we identify that the project is feasible, we then are able to jump right into a contract, whereas typically smaller affordable housing developers may not have the funds to do straight out acquisition. And as I mentioned earlier, we do have pre-development and development reserves established so that we're able to go under contract and we don't have to wait until the funding is obligated, and we have a hard commitment in order to close on a project. So what that looks like for us is, we actually do our pro forma. We have our 15-year pro forma in terms of incorporating debt service as well, because we do take out a conventional mortgage, if necessary, on projects that tend to require it. But once we identify that we're able to meet all the criteria of the National Housing Trust Fund and we go into contract, we do usually set our 30, 60, and 90-day criteria for due diligence. Completing that, we simultaneously submit the application for the National Housing Trust Fund. We have shortened the length of time from a year to project completion to actually being able to, from the start of going into contract, complete it within a 6-month period. And bear in mind that this is rehab. It's not new construction, which is a whole different process. But with the rehab, we do go in, we're looking for projects that we can deliver turnkey. So the rehab objectives also, keep us on a very tight timeline so that we can have that 6-month turnaround to have the project ready to lease up. So with that in perspective, when we have the development project timeline in place, we have submitted everything that we needed to with Division of Consumer Affairs. DCA processes, our application and advises us on anything that we may need to, double back on and submit and follow up to the development. And again, also bearing in mind with the construction, we map out that process with our contractor ahead of time. So trying to build in as much of the knowns that we can possibly identify to keep our contingency costs down and hopefully not have many change orders. So with that said, that really encompasses our pre-development and our development process with the National Housing Trust Fund. And then flipping over to operations, I just wanted to share there are some challenges when it comes to rent up, because unlike larger projects that you have economy of scale and your lease up process can be really, unruly to a certain extent, because you may be pulling the trigger on leasing up, somewhere's around, 120 units. And we've been a partner to that process. But when we're opening up a project with 2 side-by-side units in a duplex and we're placing a family, there's a huge waiting list and very stringent screening criteria that we put into place, because with a smaller project, you have to really ensure that your budget can support the project budget. And it could be a fantasy budget, if you will, until you actually go into operations and you take into consideration that you're paying that first year of taxes until the payment in lieu of taxes is negotiated and secured, and your nonprofit status, your tax exempt status is accepted. So with that said, it's so critical that we're able to not only fulfill the revenue projections that we bring in accordance to the subsidy dollars and the payment of rent, but then adequately budgeting for the expenses. Because if we run into a situation where individuals are not able to pay their rent on time, or they're not recertifying for the renewals, the subsidy renewals, you could run into really, really, huge problems quick in terms of your cost overruns and also your vacancy loss. And we obviously cannot budget in for our operating loss per se. We have our replacement reserve, but certainly we don't have a vacancy reserve, which we wish we had. But with that said, it is a, often said that you could develop a 120 unit, project and a 2 unit project, but a lot of the same work goes into it. So it's no small feat for a small nonprofit affordable housing developer, but the most fantastic part of the work that we do is being able to hand those keys over to the families, especially during the pandemic. We had, um, for lack of a better way of putting it, a raging pipeline production team that was working nonstop to place families that were, living in shelters at that time. And that really, kicked off our pipeline production targets. And with that said, we continue to develop with the National Housing Trust Fund. And again, just to close out the overview of that, the the ability to have the capital and the subsidy dollars, and having that along with the supportive services, those three legs of the stool, as we all say, are critical to the work that we do, because oftentimes we are providing the wraparound support services to the families in every aspect of their needs, and then making sure that, again, we're developing in areas that are addressing the social determinants of life so that they have access to healthcare, they have access to transportation, access to area amenities, and that they're able to not only secure stable housing, but to have the community integration that goes along with that. We're very fortunate that we're able to tap the funds and have a steady supply of production. And I welcome, at the end of the introduction of everyone's presentation, questions in regards to the work that Triple C Housing does. And thank you very much, Mark. I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Leslie. There's certainly a few nuggets in there that I want to dig into, and we'll come back to. But I do want to very quickly just clarify this program. This is the National Affordable Housing Trust Fund. These are HUD dollars that arrive at the Department of Community Affairs and are distributed on a competitive basis. And correct me if I'm wrong. The unique thing about these funds is not only are they helping on the development side of whether it's acquisition or rehab or even new construction, but they bring project-based vouchers. You refer to them as subsidies throughout the presentation. So I just want to mention that they bring vouchers, and they also allow you to program in social service dollars. And again, this is your three legs of the stool. This is incredibly unique. This is a very rare thing. Most programs are either, we're a voucher program, we're a development program, or we're a social service program. Although I don't think there's a lot of those out. But having said that, this is a very special program, and is not to be confused with the Department of Community Affairs' other Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which is very different. So if you're taking notes, you're looking for the National Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Did I capture the spirit of that program?
Yes, that's correct, Mark.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Let's move on. I would love to hear from Terry from Coastal Habitat for Humanity. She's got some, I think, some really interesting things to share about their how they've been pivoting and rising to the challenge of affordable housing development. Take it away, Terry.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for this lovely opportunity. Now I'm going to feel like we're really small. So I'm representing Coastal Habitat for Humanity. So this is Southern Monmouth County. We are a smaller Habitat for Humanity. Still, what is important is kind of the mission and vision of Habitat for Humanity. We've been servicing this area for, believe it or not, 30 years, and we're building our 21st and 22nd home. But primarily in the past, we've focused on one home a year. But because of need, we're actually trying to figure out how to scale up to support more buildings so that we can support more people, working with various municipalities. So currently we've got 2 homes that we're building simultaneously. And my role for Habitat, which will be expanding this year, is to help figure out how we can build even more. So that's, based on the need. We tend to build single family homes. We're looking to possibly get into building duplexes. And kind of what we want to look at is, the municipalities we're working with, what's the need, kind of want the homes to fit in to be one of the nicer homes on the block. We have a very stringent application screening process. Basically, we've got 3 pillars where we want to make sure that the applicants can afford an affordable mortgage, so mortgage for part of the home, that they will help participate in the build of the home, so we call that sweat equity, and also based on need. So we think it's really important that we get really qualified candidates so they become part of the community. I think that one of the themes that especially coastal habitat has is participation. We have our homeowners participate. We have a core set of volunteers to participate. We have a set of vendors to participate. So we try to make it very collaborative so that we're trying to do good and working with several different entities.
Very cool. Terry, have you seen a lot of changes to your model in the last few years due to rising costs or staffing issues or anything like that?
We definitely have with rising costs. I mean, obviously we're donation based and volunteer based. That's, we've really had to struggle with doing more outreach and working with also increasing our donation and volunteers. We're very fortunate because at the same time, we also brought people in to focus on those activities. So we were able to grow those activities to help. I think we'll see more as we're now trying to do 2 homes at once. And as we go to even more, is we will have to structure it differently, which then will probably increase costs as well. So it is changing. And we're, as I said, we're trying to determine the best approach forward.
Very good. Thank you. I see that Brian joined us from Spring Lake. I'm gonna maybe we'll switch to Brian and then we'll go to Chris. Brian, you've got probably one of the most interesting and novel approaches to affordable housing, and I think you also have the honor of perhaps being the most expensive affordable housing project per unit. But tell us a little more, Brian. You've got good audio working. All right. Brian, I see you're muted.
Good now?
Yep, very good.
Okay. So in Spring Lake, hold on one second. You there?
I hear you. Oh, we have
So
on video.
in Spring Lake, we're a little different than most towns because we're basically fully built out. We're 2 square miles along the Atlantic Ocean. We have a railroad track and the boardwalk. There's not a street light in town. There's not a speed limit over 35 miles an hour. And we do not have a restaurant with a bar other than on Ocean Avenue. We have a vibrant downtown, which is 3rd Avenue, which has a lot of different shops and restaurants. But the one thing that was always missing was a restaurant that has a liquor license. And we've tried to get the legislation changed in regard to that, but it never happened. So what we were led to was buy a piece of property in town in the business district to see if that's a way that you can get a liquor license, and which you can, which is called a concessionaire's license. But I'm not sure any municipalities out there that's going to go invest this kind of money to buy a restaurant, to buy property to put a restaurant in. So we kind of changed the game a little bit in the sense that the banking business is going out. What you see typically in your downtowns, all your banks are closing up because everyone's going online or they're going to the major highways. We have 2 banks in town, and one was built in the 1900s, the 2-story bank. So the borough looked at it to purchase, and it hits 3 different prongs. It saves an old building in town. It's going to provide us affordable housing, and it's going to provide us with a restaurant with the ability to get a liquor license because we own the property and we'll get a concessionaire's license. So the town kind of thought that was a good idea, but before we jumped into the pool too much, we had a public hearing with all our residents over at the school. and there might have been 100 people in attendance, and 99 of them were in full support of the restaurant, bar, affordable housing concept. So with that, we kind of jumped into deep end a little more. We put a bid in for the property. We ended up paying almost $3 million for the property. Half of it was paid for out of the Affordable Housing Trust. The other half came out of the general taxpayers funds. So now we own this piece of property in town, and we're in the process now going through the RFP process, which we're learning is a lot more difficult than we thought it was going to be, because you're building a restaurant, but you're also doing a construction project, and you're also building affordable housing on the second floor. So you have like 3 different components that you're trying to kind of meld together in one at one time. So we're just finishing the RFP process now. We'll go out to bid for the highest responsible bidder that will operate the restaurant. It's going to be more than likely a 15-year lease with 2 5-year options for the restaurant. Then we'll also award the second floor to an affordable housing developer. More than likely, it will be someone like Affordable Housing Alliance. They have done a project here in town recently, and we've had no issues with them. So I think they'll probably be the people we go to for that. But it's one of those projects that there's a lot of moving parts, but the town is in full support of it. There wasn't any opposition in regard to my mayor and council. So it makes a project like that work very well. And it's in the center of town, so it's very visible. But the projects we have now, the one project we have now, you wouldn't know that it's affordable housing project, because the one thing my mayor and council really do is they're okay with spending money, because the last thing they want is people to think that when you come into town where affordable housing is, to be able to point and pick it out that, oh, that's the affordable housing units in Spring Lake. You would never know that when you come into town. The affordable housing project has flagstone on the front of it. It has cedar impressions. It has a sprinkler system. It's beautifully landscaped. It looks like every single other house in Spring Lake. So majority of the people wouldn't even know it's an affordable housing. And that's the same concept that we're going to put to the Third Avenue project as well. They're willing to spend the money to make it look right, to make the units correctly sized. It's going to be 3 2-bedroom units that will be there. And I think it's a good project. It really kind of makes it different than most, and in the sense that we're a small community. Other communities like ours, it's a out of the box thinking where they could maybe do something for their downtowns while also providing affordable housing and potentially providing a restaurant or a liquor license or some other commercial space. Because when you think about it, in a lot of your towns that are small like ours, take it Asbury or Bradley, it's not uncommon that above the restaurant space, there's some kind of apartment. So that was our thinking is, what's the difference here? Excuse me. If we build a restaurant, let's put affordable housing there. We have a trust fund with a lot of money, and it's not like we're going to be able to find property in town that we can build units in on just a vacant piece of property, because it doesn't exist. And the stuff that does exist, our average assessment is $3 million. So we're not buying property and tearing it down and building affordable housing. It just doesn't work. So this gave us the ability to do that. That's really all I have.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. That's really interesting. I would have loved to have been in the room for the initial pitch of project to the council people and mayor that suggested to buy a Wells Fargo branch and turn it into a restaurant and affordable housing. And the irony is not lost on me either, that Wells Fargo is being reused as affordable housing, one of the banks that doesn't tend to be too active in that world, or at least in that population. So yeah, it's fascinating. I think there's going to be some, we'll throw out some topics later that I'm really going to be interested in your feedback on, Brian, things, and you touched a little bit on it with the acquisition But let's move on now to Chris. Chris Pugliese is the Director of Housing Development at the Affordable Housing Alliance. And oh, we've got a audience participation poll just popped up. So if you keep an eye out for that. Chris, take it away.
Sure. Thank you, Mark. I am Chris Pugliese, Director of Housing Development at the Affordable Housing Alliance. We've been in business for over 30 years, since 1990. In that time span, we operate in a bunch of different ways. We offer a lot of housing stability services, a lot of counseling services, a lot of homeless services. We operate a homeless shelter in Monmouth County, but we also develop and manage housing. We've developed over 600 apartments throughout Monmouth County in our history. Because we work in so many municipalities, that's allowed us to sort of gain inroads with all the municipalities. We have a very good reputation with our property management team. And that's allowed us to build more and more within the same municipalities and kind of grow a reputation and do things in municipalities that surround the ones we typically work in. I think one of the big approaches when it comes to developing small projects or any projects really is to focus on the township or municipality you're working with and what their true needs are. And that's something we really pride ourselves in being able to do across the spectrum of our housing. We have things from 98 to 131 unit complexes. We've participated in 2 tax credit developments, but we also do a whole litany of small style projects as well. And we work in towns that vary from Spring Lake. Obviously, Brian just talked. We have a 4-unit building there. They're a great municipality to work with. I'll mention one thing unique that they do with the property that we have is that they actually take care of the grounds for us, so they get to keep it up to what they want their standard to be. It gives our property management team a break, and it's a beautiful site, and that's partially because of the input from and work that Spring Lake puts into it. And then just, I know you said you would touch on acquisition, Mark, but acquisition is one of the most challenging things in general with affordable housing, and it's even a bigger issue on smaller projects where you just can't fit it into the budget a lot. And Spring Lake has gone out of their way with the bank project that Brian's working on to spend $3 million on prime real estate where there will be affordable housing. So the acquisition issue is out the window. So that's just an amazing thing to have done. And then we work in towns like Neptune, which are more working class urban type municipalities, all the way out to Millstone, which is a rural kind of high upper middle class type town. So we're kind of fitting in different sorts of projects where they work. And we're working with all different programs because of that. Leslie touched on the National Housing Trust Fund earlier. We're working on a new construction National Housing Trust Fund, while we're also working on new construction senior building through the Affordable Housing Trust Fund at the exact same time, both in Millstone, New Jersey. And we're breaking ground on both of those projects within the next month. So those are kind of happening simultaneously, and we're taking advantage of different DCA programs. In a township, in another township, we're looking at utilizing the neighborhood revitalization tax credit program to bring dollars into the town for home revitalization. And at the same time, we are working on a standalone tax credit project. So we're kind of, as I said, just running the gamut of every program that's out there. We're pivoting to whatever becomes available to try to utilize it. It's not easy. Everything changes on a daily basis. Obviously, costs are extreme the last several years, and they don't seem to be getting better. Everyone's battling high interest rates. The acquisition costs that I just mentioned are astronomical. So it's challenging out there, but it's a rainy day outside right now. But I think with the new legislation, there's brighter times coming for affordable housing in New Jersey. So.
Very, very good. Brian, you're certainly, I think a lot of people would probably, based on what you just said, recognize some unique things about your organization in that it's got so many different styles and sort of levels of affordable housing that's developing. But the housing nerd in me wants to point something out, and I'm really curious to get your feedback on it, is how important do you think it is that you have so many of your services and functions in-house? Like you've got project management, you've got counseling, you've got the development side itself. That's relatively unique, I think. Brian, did you have any comments about the importance
I think
of
you
having
meant Chris, Mark.
I'm sorry, I did. My bad. Yeah, I meant Chris.
I'm
Chris,
sorry, Mark. Can you repeat the question? I apologize.
yeah, no, I
I
just was pointing out that it's relatively unique for a developer, even a nonprofit developer, to have so many of these other supplemental services related to affordable housing in-house. The everything from the development side of things to social services to to the counseling to project management. That package seems very special and unique for a group like
No,
yours.
yeah, it is really unique. I came from a private tax credit developer, private tax credit developer prior to working at AHA, and yeah, I was used to on my end just kind of spitting out developments, but to have a whole like a 360 model is what I like to call it. Yeah, where we do the in-house property management after the development, and then yeah, we have wraparound services and linkages to services for basically all sorts of different populations that we house as well. We have we have homeless populations in various sites. We have people with various other sorts of disabilities. And we're able to kind of work from inside and with all of our partners. We have linkages to a lot of groups that we work with as well. So yeah, we run the gamut to keep everything organized and together with what we have in house. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure that must be really comforting for municipalities to know that, the person that's sitting in front of them or the organization that's sitting in front of them is going to be the person that they call for virtually anything that could happen or any part of the project, even after the ribbon cutting going forward. So yeah, that's very interesting. So I want to throw out the first topic, and I'm going to ask Brian to address it first. And I think I really like to hear about NIMBYism. And it sounds like, Brian, that this not in my backyard kind of sentiment that we may see in other communities was a little bit different here. You had a room full of 100 people that in 99 you said were in support of the project. Was that a surprise to you? Were you like kind of wondering how this was going to be received prior to that?
Not really. I mean, they've always wanted a restaurant, so like that was the driving force. The restaurant and the bar having a liquor license was really what they were looking for. The affordable housing project just made it work, and that was kind of the sense of it. But they also had a track record of what we did on Warren Avenue with the 4-unit project, and that it's a very visible site because if you know Spring Lake, there's a couple ways in and out, and one of the major thoroughfares is Warren Avenue, which is right on the other. You come across the railroad tracks, and there's a liquor store, and there's a deli, and there's a cleaners, and that's where everyone in Spring Lake goes for their sandwiches, gets their booze, and they get their clothes cleaned there, and they know the affordable housing site because it's there, and they see what's going on. It's been there for 7 or 8 years now, and they see that we have no issues with it. So when the affordable housing was part of this component, no one said anything because they knew what we do and how it's handled. And the people that live there are just like everyone else. They're good people. I mean, they're part of the community. Their kids are in the school system. So it was no different. It wasn't, we didn't have the not in my backyard. We don't want affordable housing on top of the restaurant. That wasn't even a question at all. It was one of those things that it was more important about being able to provide something in the downtown that was going to help the downtown that the business improvement district wanted, which was the restaurant. And that was really the driving force of it. The affordable housing component never even came in question. I think that during the meeting, they were more focused on the hours of operation of the restaurant. Was there going to be outside music? Was there going to be that stuff? Nothing about the affordable housing. It was a non-issue. And I don't think we ever thought it was going to be an issue, quite honestly, when we had the meeting. The meeting more was really driven where the taxpayers going to be okay with us funding a portion of the project out of the general taxpayers fund. The affordable housing side of it really wasn't an issue.
Very cool. Leslie, I have to assume that given that you're working in special populations, that you've experienced at least a little bit of NIMBYism and resistance to some of your projects.
We have, Mark. In particular, when we're doing group home developments, that tends to be a real sore subject for neighborhood folks to welcome us into the community. Again, a group home, it's hard to conceal that kind of development, especially when we're retrofitting it for, you know, universal design and handicap accessibility with the ramps going in. So we have faced a lot of backlash in developing, you know, special needs housing, and again, particular standalone single family residents. With our multi-family residential development, we have been fortunate in not running into as much NIMBYism. But again, when we're doing when we're utilizing the National Housing Trust funds and we're establishing, you know, the municipal partnership up front, we are very clear about, you know, our process and welcoming applications, you know, to add on to our wait list. So there tends to be more receptiveness to our development in a neighborhood where we have multifamily units that are going in versus a single residence development. And you know, the way that we've been able to address the issues around NIMBYism is holding, you know, basically a town hall type of meeting. We invite folks into the house ahead of time before folks are placed. So there is a lot of, you know, external communications that we're putting out to the stakeholders and interested parties. But, you know, in particular with the recent group home that we're opening right now, we were met with a lot of subtle backlash, if you will, and just dragging out the timeline for us and getting all of our pre-approvals with zoning and subcode approvals. But I think that, again, it's so important to provide the education and the background as to what we're doing and how that could benefit the neighborhood and fulfill their master plan. And you know, it's our hope that if we have that ongoing communication, that any form of the, you know, NIMBY backlash can be diminished over time. And again, providing that education up front as opposed to moving folks in and then having to deal with that public relations nightmare, because now you're trying to circumvent the exposure to a very vulnerable population on top of stressing the staff that are, you know, the front line if somebody's ringing the bell. And I think it's really crucial that that level of education is provided up front. And then we also educate our staff how to handle those types of situations. But it is a challenge, certainly.
Do you get the impression that the education component is the biggest impact of that education component is understanding the residents? Because I feel like there's in working on projects all over the state and actually over in Pennsylvania as well, I've noticed that, you know, group home has almost gotten, it's almost like a dirty word. It's, you know, and people don't really understand it that much. How much of that is, do you think, is driving this NIMBYism?
I think it depends on the population that you're serving. And you know, unfortunately, if you're developing a site that is specifically supporting individuals with severe and persistent mental illness, that's going to be received very differently than a site that's being developed for individuals with intellectual disabilities. That's just the reality. There's a, you know, the perception is reality for people that perceive, you know, a population suffering from a mental health condition as being much more of a threat than individuals with an intellectual disability. So the educational component is really important for us to identify what it is that we're doing to support the independent living skill training and, you know, providing the wraparounds. But the intent is to help individuals to gain the level of independence to move out into the community. So the community integration activities are really important to immerse our folks into the community as soon as possible, and that they get to meet, you know, individuals in the neighborhood and establish those relationships. It's not so easy, but at the same time, we take baby steps in doing that. But it does come back to the education and being prepared. Not being caught off hand in communicating what it is that we do with our supportive services and the wraparound support, and what the intention is as far as the endeavors to move individuals out into the community on their own. But it is a very real, challenge and a concern, and we want to be responsible to the communities in which we, own, operate, live, work, have fun, and socialize. So making those connections really is critical.
It's fascinating. Chris, I imagine there's some overlap with the Affordable Housing Alliance with these populations. Are you seeing similar struggles and obstacles with NIMBYism in your projects?
I guess to a degree, to be honest, I haven't seen a whole lot of it. But yeah, we operate a couple of group homes. There's been some challenges, but we've kept a good relationship with neighbors, and we've met with people when we've had to. It's nothing overwhelming that we've seen though, for the most part.
Interesting. Terry, if this were like 6 months ago, before my experience with a project in Pennsylvania, I would have laughed if you told me that there was NIMBYism going on with habitat projects. You may have a different experience, but and this may just be an outlier, but I worked on a project recently that basically was shut down over NIMBYism. Are you seeing any resistance to your projects in the communities you're working in?
Yes, actually, one of the projects that we just broke ground on. Yes, I mean, think about it. It's a more of an upper middle class neighborhood, and so a lot of it is, we've changed what the house is going to look like, similar to what Brian's done. We put porches on houses and driveways, and we really want to fit into the neighborhood. So we really take that into account, and then we want to make sure that everybody knows what we're doing. So it's communication, it's attending meetings ahead of time and sharing plans. And over time, everybody felt more comfortable. But in the beginning, yes, we did see some of that.
Interesting. How much of, and I'll just throw this out to the group, how much of this have you seen? Oh, we have another poll that popped up. How much of this NIMBYism has translated into the municipality slowing things down, or maybe not granting approvals in a timely fashion, or how much of that is like translated over in your experience in dealing with municipalities, if at all? That's for anybody that has a thought on that.
I think for us, it was just doing more work. So, I mean, it was just, a little bit, more homework and communication and education.
Good. We had a comment came in, a question came in from Megan York, that was something that I wanted to talk about as well. And let's talk real estate taxes. I know Brian's going to be the owner of his affordable housing project, so he's kind of controls his own destiny on the taxes for the property. But I have to imagine this is a pinch point for a lot of projects, especially in a situation where maybe sort of sticking your neck out a little bit with acquisition in advance of having all the financing in place and not having sort of guarantees available to you that the taxes were going to be adjusted to make them less burdensome, we'll call them, to your affordable housing projects. Leslie, you want to start? Or Terry, please.
You want to go? You go.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Terry. So as I mentioned earlier, when we're going into a municipality, we do have the conversations with the mayor and the administration in regards to the project and the payment in lieu of taxes. Engaging that conversation early on is really important. As I mentioned, with much smaller projects, being able to budget, taking into account the first year, sometimes 2 years with the tax exemption application, it could take a little bit longer. So for instance, in one of the projects that we developed, the taxes were $19,000 a year, and we actually had to take on 2 years of the tax burden and incorporate that into our budget. We had to cover with some reserves. At the end of the day, after the project was completed, leased up, we're still paying down that liability, unfortunately. But the reality is that you have until October. So once you develop a project, you need to map out that your October application deadline, October 1st, is really crucial, that you're submitting the tax exempt application, and the payment in lieu of taxes can be negotiated in advance of putting in that tax exempt. But certainly it's not it doesn't prohibit you from applying for the tax exempt status. So you have to do that anyway. And the cutoff is October 1st. So you have to put that into consideration with your budget and your construction timeline. And then it's a year from that point that you could get the approval awarded. But for us, it is really crucial that we negotiate on that payment in lieu of taxes in order to make the project feasibility work for us, because we are taking that into account ahead of time and then figuring 2 years post lease up that we will have that tax relief that it comes through. But certainly there have been projects where it hasn't come through or it was not approved in advance, and we had to incorporate that into our budget, and it makes for very, very difficult. I mean, you were razor thin on your profit and loss statements with cash flow when it comes to that. So it's something that we definitely build in advance, and it's not a given if you're a nonprofit. So certainly there are municipalities that may not grant it, or will only grant a small portion. The abatement is for the student portion. So it's crucial to take that into consideration, especially when you're developing in areas where the real estate taxes are quite substantial.
Yeah, thank you. That's interesting. I would hope that these communities that were resistant to issue a pilot previously to your projects, now that round 4 is coming around and they're going to be evaluating opportunities to grab credits, just credits within the community, that there may open the door for a negotiation to make your project kind of added to the affordable housing portfolio, and in return maybe help you with your taxes. I think it's also, I also just want to very quickly just talk about pilot and just make sure everybody's understanding what we're talking about. We're not necessarily talking about tax exemption. A lot of times we're talking about an agreement with the development that allows the taxes to be calculated based on income from rent. And the beauty of that, or the importance of that to a project that is, as Leslie mentioned, is sometimes on razor thin margins on its operating budget, is that it creates a certain amount of predictability in the long term, and you're not subject to sort of ebbs and flows of reassessments and tax increases that could very easily upset those margins. Because if anybody was doing some back of the napkin math, a $19,000 tax bill for a property, if it was a 2-unit project, is likely 100% of rent. I mean, you might not even be able to cover the tax bill with the rent revenue. Chris, where are you, Chris, and working in this discussion with municipalities, and are you dealing with this as a challenge in your projects?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's an immediate discussion. Honestly, if we think we're not going to get some sort of a tax break, we probably wouldn't move forward with a project for the majority of time, for the reason that you just said, especially on a small project. But yeah, the municipalities that we're working on with right now have been good, and we've been able to negotiate on some properties full tax exemption, on other properties pilots that fit the landscape of the project. Yeah, and when you do like a larger tax credit projects, the 9% deals, they have, the HMFA has their built-in pilot, so that helps negotiate on those. You don't necessarily have that advantage on the smaller projects, but you can put that out there that, it literally does not work without this tax break. So, yeah, we've been able to, every municipality we're working with though has worked with us on taxes, but yeah.
Yeah. Terry, what's the process like for getting the taxes revisited and on your projects? Have you been seeing any challenges in establishing lower tax rates?
So far we haven't, but as we're now looking to increase and work with more municipalities, I mean, we tended to stay with the, obviously we have a smaller footprint, but that is an area where we've had, started to have more discussions, making sure we stay on top of it, because it is a big hit. And also, as we now are looking at, we get a donated property more than since we're small and the way we operate, it's mostly donations. And now that we're looking for more, more land that we can build on, that is also a factor that we discuss as we're having those discussions.
Interesting. Well, that's the next topic I wanted to talk about, the all important land acquisition. I know this is has always been a challenge for affordable housing projects, and I think the crazy real estate market over the last few years has just kind of amplified it even further. And it and I'm anxious to get some feedback on this topic in general, but I'm also want to not just talk about the value that it creates. There's also the contracting problems with it, in that if a piece of land becomes available for sale, you've got to put your offer is going to be evaluated among probably multiple offers, and you have in the idea that you're going to ask a property seller to give you 90 days to sort out some financing on the back end and some resolutions from some government agency probably isn't the most compelling offer that they're going to see. And I'm curious, and I know, Leslie, you've mentioned a little bit about the idea that you've got this little bit of reserve that you're able to use to grab these units and kind of solve that problem. How long did you try before that? I mean, was this something you've always been doing, or is this something that just sort of evolved based on the crazy real estate market?
So we've actually, for new development and land acquisition, we've veered away from new construction, specifically because the land acquisition costs are so expensive. In addition to that, we have very conscientiously stayed away from lands that would require us to project plan out well in advance for utility hookups. We've gone through new construction and we were hit by Katrina in doing so. So our utility hookups, we were almost done with construction, but we had to wait on the utility hookups that we ran into cost overruns as a result of that. Just to wait for PSE&G to come out to do a hookup for electrical was far beyond the time limits that we anticipated, and it really hit us hard. So we've steered away from new construction for that very reason, even taking into account everything and all of the contractors that we would have to coordinate to come in for lands that, again, does not have all the utility hookups. And it just happens that that's the land that's the least expensive, that is, requiring us to tackle all of those challenges. So we have veered away from that, and we have focused primarily on our rehabilitation, and that has given us the opportunity to continue that pipeline development with the National Housing Trust Fund. So yeah, I think that answers your question, Mark.
Yeah, well done. Thank you. Chris, I'd love to hear your perspective on this. This seems like not only is it impacting budgets, it's impacting timelines. It's just creating a lot of uncertainty. Do you have a magic formula for dealing with the land acquisition costs?
I'd probably be a millionaire if I had a magical formula in New Jersey. But I don't. I do not have a magical formula. But yeah, I consider it usually to be the #1 impediment for building affordable housing. It's just land is just so astronomically expensive right now. And a few years ago, you used to be able to you could do an agreement of sale and pay someone, to have a contract agreement, pay a few $1,000s a month or every 6 months or something to hold on to that land. And that's just completely unrealistic in today's market, because everyone can, sell their property so quickly at such a high number. The #1 thing, which is not a magic formula and doesn't work, is really to have good municipal partners that are willing to work towards fulfilling their affordable housing obligation by donating land if they have land to donate. That's kind of been the main way we've been able to acquire land, is through the townships contributing them to the projects. I have the benefit and curse of walking into an organization with a 30-year history. So we have properties throughout Monmouth County that are in positions where they need to be rehabbed or rebuilt at this time. So I'm kind of evaluating our whole portfolio in that manner. So we have existing properties that wouldn't require us to go out there and acquire. And then I think, we're kind of on an endless hunt to find private funds to help us acquire lands. But I have not cracked that formula yet, nor has anyone else in our organization. But it's tough. Yeah, it's a very difficult market. There's a lot of private developers fleeing New Jersey in general, and that's a huge reason. So.
Yeah, Chris, do you see um, a situation um, where you're finding a suitable piece of property and that the town may own, and you're sort of encouraging them to go through an RFP process for a named redeveloper, and is that an approach that's viable in your world?
It could be. I mean, yeah, there's some towns that have already kind of pegged properties on their own, and other times we approach towns with ideas for properties. I'll see, what makes sense based on what's out there funding wise and where a property lies, based on amenities and utilities and that sort of thing. It kind of works both ways. A lot of times towns work with their planners and come up with properties that they think are suitable.
Yeah, yeah, Terry, I'm going to guess that the idea of having to pay for a piece of land for habitat is basically a deal breaker for the pro forma to sell one. How often are you out in the market, and how often are you taking land from municipalities and other donors?
And keep in mind that we're trying to grow, so that's gives some opportunities. One of the things is we tend to have we tend to say, okay, we will take undersized lots or lots that may have issues, because in our case for coastal, we're still building new construction. So one of the properties that we're working on now, the home that will be done in a couple months, it's on an undersized lot, so that meant it was somebody more apt to donate it or for a small fee. But that is by far our biggest issue, and it's really how do we partner with municipalities to help them. And no, it's probably the thing that the leadership of Coastal works on. Other habitats do buy land and they try to negotiate deals, but they're usually the larger ones, but we haven't gotten to that point yet.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I think we'd see the rehab market beforehand. That's probably would be the next, is rehabs versus new builds.
Well, that's interesting. That's not something I've seen before. So the habitat would acquire a property that needed renovation, and then flip it to one of your partner families after rehab. Are you? I want to talk just briefly about the kind of the personal side of things, and the challenges that are you seeing any challenges with your volunteerism frequency since over the last 5 years, or are you seeing any challenges on the partner family side with people unable to donate the hours that they need to get to the threshold to be a partner family?
So as far as volunteers, so we have two different mechanisms for volunteers. We have core sets of volunteers that work in a restore, as well as volunteers that work on construction. And that has actually, we've got an increase of, it's still just a core group of people. A lot of the other volunteer work is by organizations, and we've actually seen that increase over the last couple of years. I think as corporations are wanting to be more giving back, and it's a great thing to do as a team build. So that really helps, especially as we're now planning 2 homes. Do we think that we will need to engage more trade and still have to go that route as we're now doing the 2 homes? Yes. But we still have the benefit of, I'd say, an increase in volunteers because of the increase in corporate volunteers. So that's helped. As far as homeowners, we just completed a homeowner selection for the second home, that one we just broke ground, and we actually had 90 applicants. We had, of those, 62 that met the requirements for, it's a 3-bedroom home, so the household size of 3 and the income levels. And so I think a lot of that's the economy and the state of where we are, is there's actually a lot of people in need. And so, I mean, I always tell everybody, if we could build more homes faster, that's what we'd love to do. And part of that is sweat equity and participation. It's not the hours aren't all being, you have to go and work on the home. A lot of it's still showing up at our events, having the kids do things like our thank you notes are usually hand drawn from the kids. So it's how to engage the family to be part of the process. And both the family we just selected, as well as the one that's in the home that's almost done, have been just tremendous, and we've not had problems with the hours. I do know other habitats may not be as fortunate, but at least we have right now with our 2 homeowners that we're working with, it's been great.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and shout out to the Restore model. I'm a huge fan of Restore. If you're on this call and you have not been to your local Habitat for Humanity Restore, get it on your list. It is it's a place of adventure and wonder. Any day it could be something completely different. I'm a big fan. So that's very cool to hear that you're able to sort of wrestle with some of the challenges. Are you seeing people? I've helped design and implement first-time homebuyer programs, and I've seen a lot of, over the years, people that are applying to be in a home ownership space that just can't get up to, that are just basically don't make enough income. Can you talk a little bit about the challenges there?
We do see that, and that's what's really difficult, because our homeowners still need to get a mortgage. And there's two approaches. Habitat does carry mortgages, but what we're trying to do is actually go more towards the third party. So that's actually the banks carrying the mortgage, and it's not a mortgage for the price of the home, it's a mortgage that they can afford. So, we do need to go with the HUD income limits, and we really do need to stress, we do a lot of scrutiny financially to make sure that the homeowners we select can afford whatever that affordable mortgage is. And we have a whole way to calculate it. So it's tough, but that is the guidelines. And that's also wanting to make sure that when you talk about the different municipalities and making sure that homeowner is part of the community, you want them to be able to, be paying the mortgage, to make this feel like, we're not just giving them a home, they're part of the whole process, and that will help them be a better community member too.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's very cool. Chris, I wanted to get your feedback on this topic. Are you seeing any sort of issues with on the human side of things, whether it be issues with hiring in your organization or identifying households that are looking for housing?
Yeah, I think Toy Collins is out there in the audience right now, our chief program officer, and is probably much better to talk on this than me. But yes, we are seeing, obviously, we're inundated with calls with people that need housing. There's not a lot of housing out there. We have in-house homebuyer counseling as well, and we've found it incredibly challenging to be able to find people qualified for what's out there now. I know and again, Toy can speak to this much better than me, but I know one of the things she's done is work directly with all of our lending partners to try to make sure there's programs and out there that help home buyers more directly. And then I may seg into the rehab for a second, since we're talking about owned homes. One thing we also do that helps towns meet their housing obligations, they can have a homeowner rehabilitation program for income qualified homeowners. The town can use their trust funds, or if they're a town that has home or CDBG funds, they could use those as well to contribute towards working on somebody's home. So we as a third party have multiple contracts with different municipalities where we basically manage between a homeowner. We help them bid out and find a contractor and sort of manage that process between the homeowner and the contractor, and then getting the contractor paid through the county as well. So we're able to fix life safety issues for homeowners that can't afford it otherwise, for things like roof replacements, handicapped accessibility, HVAC systems, things like that. So that's actually a program that it was difficult for me to grasp when I started here. It's not something that was like in my wheelhouse before that, but we've got it moving, and I think it's actually a really, really valuable program.
It sounds so simple when you describe it. Just find a homeowner that's low and moderate income that needs some work, and just activate a contractor. Is it fair to say, Chris? And I don't get to ask this question a lot to people, because you've got the full continuum of affordable housing is over there at the Affordable Housing Alliance. Is it fair to say that housing rehabilitation is the most difficult activity to execute on, just from a like hours and handholding and social engineering standpoint?
It is it's not easy, and one of the obviously, it gets murky sometimes because you have, like in a town like Millstone or Neptune, we have a $25,000 cap on on the work we can actually do. And somebody might have an HVAC issue, but then we go in there with an inspector, and it turns out they have mold all over their bathroom, and it becomes a much bigger job than we can do encapsulated within the rehab program. So then we have to start trying to bring in other agencies or refer them to other ways. It becomes too big of a job sometimes for what the program encapsulates. But yeah, it's a lot of man hours. We have a couple of staff members that work with me that are kind of dedicated to the program, and I feel like have kind of got it running fairly smoothly though. But yeah, there's hiccups on every job, and some jobs that we just can't do.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to reflect on some of the changes in pricing, because that $25,000 cap that you talked about was probably something that was, I'm going to guess, was established in like the 80s as a reflection of the amount of work that should be able to be done to bring a home up to code, and of course also to avoid triggering, some rather archaic lead paint regulations at the federal level. But and we're and so we're seeing the prices of everything going up dramatically, and it's just making it more and more difficult to bring these rehab cases to completion with a budget that's 20 plus years old. And we're also dealing with that too on the other side of affordable housing, where municipalities have set up these programs called these market to affordable programs, or these programs that are designed to incentivize people to willingly create affordable housing credits either in their home or on a site. And those we've got, we're working with guidance that suggests that $30,000 should be enough money to convert a market rate unit into something that's affordable. And that these prices have just grown so much, and these numbers were set so long ago. It makes it incredibly difficult. So I commend you on your willingness to get into that rehab world and work with that. Are there any situations where municipalities have pledged their local affordable housing trust fund dollars, or the rehab portion of their trust fund dollars, to help bring a unit that would have been over budget to completion? So if you bump into your cap of the program at, say, $25,000 with the county, are municipalities willing to step in and help get that credit done?
Yeah, typically the municipalities we work with have helped if we go over the cap, in the sense of not necessarily. If we can ask for a waiver ahead of time as well, but it's normally been a situation where we discover something in the middle of the work and there's a change order that puts us over the cap. But usually we've been able to get waivers, and the municipality will kick in and help us with that. Yeah.
Just roughly, what percentage of units are being denied just because of need? It just like right out of the gate exceeds $25,000 and probably isn't achievable.
I would say it heavily depends on the municipality. I would say, I don't know. It seems like town. I don't want to throw it like one. There's a town that we work with that has a lot more standing old homes that tend to have like mold issues that kind of kills the budget. But we work with another town where I don't think we've had one that hasn't worked. So I think it just depends on the nature of the homes and ages based on the town, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Terry, Habitat's doing rehabs too, right? You're working with veterans.
We do veteran, yeah, and I might have missed that one. No, we not only veterans, but also with aging in place. So we try to keep elderly folks in their homes as well. So we have two different programs, and we do in one municipality, we do have funding from the municipality. From the veterans program is heavily funded by different veterans organizations as well. So we do use those funds to help keep veterans and elderly folks in their homes. And it's, obviously the rising costs have become more of an issue. So we try to do as much as we can. And actually, sometimes it's just really getting the word out and having people to actually help. So we've seen both.
Interesting. And the work that you're doing is largely done by volunteers.
Most of this is done by volunteers. Some of it is obviously if, like we've worked with donations of heaters. We had a couple heaters at the beginning of the winter. So where there's certain programs that we're aware of, we've been able to bring them in. I know that in one case we had a homeowner that needed some significant plumbing work, and the municipality that home was in, we actually were able to use those funds to pay for the plumber. So it's really trying to bridge the gap between what we've got and where we can help the most.
Interesting. Leslie, I know you're doing rehab from your, as part of your housing development model. Have you looked at this as, this idea of, do you have any thoughts or comments on the other panelists about on this topic?
Specific to the National Housing Trust Funds, there are very stringent requirements, environmental requirements and rehab requirements that, there's the lead-based paint issue that we have to obviously look at very closely when we're looking at purchasing sites that are, 1970s, 1980s, and in terms of their age. We're really looking at more so houses that are like post 1980, 1990 development. So we've actually geared our housing stock search to not run us into any, issues around lead-based paint. There's an issue around, your windows and your R rating for the windows that we have to look at very closely. So we have to factor that into our rehab cost because oftentimes they don't meet the criteria. So we're looking at all of those environmental conditions. And again, our team is very well versed in identifying what some of those pitfalls may be that won't meet the criteria for the National Housing Trust Fund. Certainly when there's, other funding mechanisms that are in place, those are different requirements. But we've actually seen our construction costs go up substantially. I know that the old HMFA guidelines were no more than 250 per unit, right? So we had those requirements. That is just outside of any realm of normality anymore. Like it depends on what project that we're looking at. It just runs such a wide range, but we look at that certainly as well when it comes to factoring the construction costs. And I really think that it's critical that you have a contractor that could go out with you and is available to look at any of the sites that we are about to go under contract. We actually do have a contractor go out with us ahead of time so we could take that into consideration in terms of what the entirety of our rehab costs are that are seen until we run our environmentals.
Interesting. So I can't help but point out that two of you are basically trying to avoid lead. Chris's program is capped at 20. Chris, you're probably capped at 24,999 if I'm going to guess, because of the $25,000 kicks in the lead abatement rule there. And Leslie, you're lopping off an entire section of the housing market simply to avoid dealing with lead paint. And it's certainly a major problem with our housing stock. And just I got to step on my soapbox for just a second and just recognize that this is not the way forward. The idea of avoiding these rules is probably a great suggestion that we need to be revisiting them and finding a better path. And I think there's some lead hazard protection approaches that have been coming out of the Healthy Homes program at HUD that I would very much love to see the other programs, the CDBG program, the home program. I'd love to see them adopted, including our state regs are very archaic about this topic as well, and that when a child is identified as having an elevated blood level of lead, the home must be abated according to our state health department. And this is not always the case. The kid may not have been, of course, you've got to figure out where the lead contamination took place, but abatement isn't necessarily the answer. And I would encourage municipalities that are designing rehab programs to adopt the healthy homes initiatives in their programs and voluntarily place them into the programs to help reduce the odds of a child being poisoned with lead is really, really debilitating if you spend any time looking at the effects on that and the financial implications of a child going through adulthood with the effects of that throughout their life. It's the ratio I've heard about is a 80 to 1 in ratio. So for every dollar in rehab and abatement that you're spending or dealing with lead, you're saving $80 on the back end of life of that child or that adult. So yeah, that's a really important topic. I'm hoping that we're going to see some changes, as I said, at the federal and state level. It looks like we are running very close to the time, so I'm going to maybe wrap up here. I know we've had a couple of quiz questions pop up. Hopefully everybody saw those. I know we didn't get a chance to announce them. I want to thank the panelists today. This has been really formative and honestly interesting and fun for me. I love hearing about these sorts of things and these smaller projects that really fly under the radar of a lot of affordable housing plans and a lot of municipalities. So hopefully this is kind of reinvigorating municipal housing liaisons and administrative agents to roll up their sleeves and figure out ways to work with organizations like yourselves and bringing additional affordable housing units to fruition. Lastly, I want to reiterate something I said earlier if you joined us late, and that is that HPNJ is going to be pushing out a save the date for March 8th, which will be, I'm sorry, excuse me, May 8th. Thank you, Liz. May 8th, look for an email asking you to save the date for May 8th. We're going to be doing that'll be the first of a series of sessions that we're going to do on the Fair Housing Act and some of the changes that are specifically going to be affecting administrative agents and municipal housing liaisons. We're going to try to keep all of those sessions focused on looking at these rules through that lens and from the perspective of the AAs and the MHLs. So keep an eye out for that. And with that, I will give everybody 2 minutes back. Lindsay, was there anything else that I needed to?
There will be a survey that should pop up on people's screen after I end the webinar. So I just encourage you to take the survey so that we can have your feedback. And thank everyone for attending.
Yeah, those surveys are super important. The committee on programming looks at those answers very carefully. So I'd really ask everybody to take just a few minutes to give us your feedback, not only on the session, but mention anything else that you'd like to see covered in future sessions.
And if you're a member and you want to join the programming committee, then also reach out to us because I'm sure they would love to have your help.
Yeah, agreed. Big shout out to the housing committee, Brian Rappaport. Chris mentioned Toy Collins. She's a big contributor there. Gail Pfeiffer and the rest of the crew. You know who you are. I'm not going to go mention everybody's names, but thanks everybody for putting this together. And thank you for the panelists for taking the time and being with us today.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.